Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the April 23rd, 2025 edition of the Longmont Planning and Zoning Commission. I'm Judson Height, acting as your MC tonight. Recording Secretary Madrid, can you take a roll call, please?
Chair Height,
Here, present.
Commissioner Lang,
Here.
Commissioner Wang,
Here.
Commissioner Poland,
Here.
Commissioner Saunders,
Here.
Commissioner Earl,
Here.
Commissioner Jordan,
Here.
Commissioner Armett.
Here.
Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you. Next is reading of the land acknowledgement, which I acknowledged earlier. No, I'm not going to say that. In any event, trying to be as respectful as I can to this statement. We acknowledge that the city of Longmont sits on the traditional territories of the nations of the Cheyenne, Arapaho, Ute, and other indigenous peoples. We endeavor to honor that history and the living and spiritual connection of these first peoples with this land. We commit to face the injustices that happened when these lands were taken, and to educate our communities, ourselves, and our children to ensure that these injustices do not happen again. That said, moving on to communications. Is there anything from Director Grant Penland at this time?
Good evening, Master of Ceremony and Commission members. I don't have anything other than to say thank you for all that are here for being able to attend.
Next is continued business. There being none, we'll move on to new business. Item 6A, evaluating and improving the Planning and Zoning Commission's staff reports, presented to us by Planning Manager Don Burchett.
Good evening, Chairman Height, members of the Commission, Don Burchett, Planning Manager. Here tonight to talk to you hopefully about evaluating and improving our staff reports. I don't think I was at the meeting where this happened, but I believe Commissioner Saunders had asked that we focus a little bit on our staff reports with you. My hope tonight is to go through kind of an overview of the kind of reports that the Planning Division puts together for the community and for this board specifically, both as the Planning Commission and the Board of Adjustment. Try to give you a little bit of background understanding of why we do what we do, and then hopefully at the end give you some talking points, some ideas, some questions, and then turn it back over to the MC so he can try and lead discussion related to giving us some feedback on things maybe that you'd like to see us either look at doing differently or providing in a different way or additional information. But again, the overall goal is to make this an improvement process, and we're always open to trying to make it better, not only for yourselves, but also for the citizens and for the development community that looks at and reviews these as well. So with that, I'll go ahead and just get started here. Just as an overview, so really quick, I'm just going to touch on the three types of communications that my staff puts together. We do both for the Planning and Zoning Commission communications. We also do Board of Adjustment, which is currently, since we don't have a quorum for the Board of Adjustment, that's the Commission. And then also City Council communications for projects that go up to them either as a recommendation from this commission or in some cases as an appeal. Just want to go over the report structure a little bit with you, try to let you understand what we're trying to do, whether we're doing that well or not. That could be debatable. And again, that's one of the reasons why we're here. And then ultimately turn it back over to the commission so that you guys can have some discussion. So if we're good, I'll keep going. Maybe?
I think we're good.
Okay. All right. So as I mentioned just a second ago, we prepare three kinds of reports. Again, Planning and Zoning Commission communications, which you're most familiar with, Board of Adjustment, and then City Council packets. Again, each one of these has its own really unique way and intent in the way that we write these specifically. So as an example, when we write for the City Council and we're doing a communication for them, one of the interesting things that they have as a request from staff is for example, the financial impacts to the community related to their proposal that they're considering. So as best we can, we do our best to identify what those are for the city council. There's obviously many ways to look at the financial impacts. So one person may see it as a positive, one may see it as a negative. We try to, in general, just provide what our understanding of is the impact to the budget for the community and its impact. The council communications contain a lot of the same information that you see in your Planning and Zoning Commission information, especially when they are a decider on a major development application that the commission has made a recommendation on, or if it is an appeal that is being heard by the city council through the appeal process. So again, much of the same information, although laid out a little bit differently. Do you need a second to get all that up and running? Okay, I'll wait for a second. It gives me a second to take a drink of water. All right, I'll just a few technical difficulties here, but we'll give you just a second. That's why I love live TV. It's great. Everybody at home is wondering what I'm waiting for. So. Yeah, I'll just keep drinking. Yeah. Just continue. Okay, I'll just keep going then. All right. No, you're fine. The next type again is the Planning and Zoning Commission communications, and again, because of the nature of this board, some of the things that we try to focus on in more detail that we may not for the other communications include property details, the adjacent land uses, existing developments that are around the property, project description. We try to provide as much and as thorough of a description of the project and the request for the commission so that you have a full understanding of what they are requesting you to approve or to make a recommendation on. And then we do our best to provide an analysis of the review criteria based on the information that's been provided to us. The last type of communication that you would see would be the Board of Adjustment communication. Again, when you're acting as the Board of Adjustment, when we can't have a quorum with the regular Board of Adjustment, you get to act in their stead. And when we're writing our communications from the Board of Adjustment, a couple of things that you're going to notice is one is that we don't make a recommendation, where we do with both of the other communications. We do try to make sure that we're outlining what the specific variance request is. We try to provide as much information that the applicant has given us related to what are the factors that are causing the necessity for the variance request. We're trying not to provide a judgment, right or wrong, as to whether or not that the variance is in itself warranted. We don't believe that is really our role. Our role really is to try to present the facts to you and give the applicant the opportunity to present that evidence as to whether or not the variance is supportable by the Planning Commission. So quickly, we'll go through the structure of the Planning Commission packet specifically to try to help give you an understanding of why we're doing what we do. The front page, which is shown up here on the right, is pretty typical, right? We have our general information about the application. We have the surrounding land uses, zoning information, the applicant information. Again, with this, we're trying to establish context for the application. We're also trying to provide some transparency. We include the property owner and the applicant information on this, as well as our staff information, so that if any of the public or the newspaper, anybody has questions, they have the ability to know who's actually making the request, who's working on the project, and how to get a hold of us. So that's some of the information that we provide here on the first sheet. The next thing that we're doing when we go through the Planning and Zoning Commission packet is we're trying to evaluate the application in conformance to the comprehensive plan. We have specific review criteria, but we also try to give you a little bit of context for how this property fits in, not only with the land use, but understanding its context in relationship to the adjacent area, whether or not there's collector streets or arterial roads, what the adjacent land uses are, so that again, whether it's developed or not, you have an understanding of what the future vision for this area is in context to the development application. The next thing that we try to get into and hopefully provide enough context on, and this is an area that I think we could do a better job on, is trying to give you a little bit more information about the Development Review Committee process. Not just saying that it was in our process for a year, but actually trying to provide a little bit more context related to maybe the discussions that went back and forth on drainage and maybe how that's been handled, the discussion about the traffic study and maybe how we've made a finding that it is in conformance with the city standards or not. But trying to give you a little bit better understanding of the back and forth that happens. It's truly where the sausage gets made. I mean, it's messy. I mean, we strive to go for 3 reviews on projects before we get them through the system, but we have projects that go 7, 8, 9 reviews through our system. And sometimes that's related to not only both maybe the applicant not performing and their consultants. Sometimes it's also staff. You know, if my staff misses something on a review and we identify it on a second review and we need that information, that can cost somebody extra time. So it's not to say that if you see an application that's been in for a year, 2 years, that it was only the applicant's fault. I mean, I don't want to try and say that there's blame necessarily, other than I would say it's a partnership. We work together to try to get them to meet the code and the regulations. And if they can't, to identify for you where they're not meeting code, so that if there is an ability to grant relief, that you understand the context of that and can make a decision related to that project specifically. The next thing that we try to do is try to give you an understanding of the neighborhood input that we've received. So if we get emails, if we get correspondence from folks that have been notified, we include that information in the packet. We typically try to provide you a link or a summary of the neighborhood meeting so that you can understand kind of the context of how that meeting went, what the concerns were, whether or not the applicant has tried to address those. Oftentimes, you know, that's really kind of the crux of the issues with the neighbors, is that they feel there's a problem, and often they feel that they're not being heard or that the item is not being addressed by the developer. Sometimes there's not regulations to address their concern. And that can happen a lot. Blocking views is not a standard that we have in our code for approving or denying, but yet that's often a thing that we will hear when we're looking at property that's been undeveloped, is they're impacting my ability to see the mountains or to see that open space area. But if it's not a review criteria, there may not be anything we can require the developer to do, but the developer themselves may come forward and say, we actually tried to limit our buildings that are adjacent to these to a similar height, to 1 or 2 stories, when they could have been 3. So they may try to do something, but it's not a quote unquote code requirement that we can apply. But we try to identify those things for you from the neighborhood input. Referral responses, as I talked about a couple months ago when I was here talking about our process and the referral process when we send items to Boulder County, to the school district, to the adjacent fire districts, things like that. We try, if there are comments that we get, and I will tell you, it's only a handful of referral groups that actually respond typically. Typically, it's the school district, Xcel Energy, and that's about it. And occasionally a few others, but not many. We try to at least give you information from what they have said so that you understand the context. If there is an issue, as we talked about previously when I was here talking about our intergovernmental agreement with the school district, if there were ever a referral response back from the school district that noted that the school was over the 125% capacity, the benchmark capacity, that under the IGA, we would have to recommend denial. We would explain that to you, not only within the report, but also noting that in this referral section so that you understood where that was coming from. That's an example of if we identify something that is seen as potentially negative or impactful to the decision that you're going to make, we're going to note that in there. Otherwise, we'll still let you know that we received them. But typically, if it's just noting that we received them, there was nothing in there of substance, just to let you know. The largest part of the report is the review criteria analysis. This is staff's attempt to try to provide you with context, information from the actual plans that explain how we believe they have either met the review criteria or not met it. I don't know that I've said this to all of you, so I'll state this again, for everybody who might be watching at home. We get a lot of applications that come into our system that start as pre-application meetings with people with ideas of what they want to do. And it happens, and we had one actually this week that we got in that actually appears that it's not going to be allowed on the property that they want to develop. So we're going to have that meeting with them to let them know that as they've proposed it currently, it couldn't be approved. If they want to make application and come and argue to the commission that we're wrong, they have that right. We would process that through and bring that up with a recommendation of denial. But I would tell you that in all my years, I've only had one personally that has ever known going forward we were going to recommend denial and has actually gone through, and that was for an annexation. Typically, people drop a project in our system if they know that we're not going to be supporting it or it's not allowed. And so when you see us, we've typically gotten all the easy ones out, right? There still may be some variances or some hurdles to get over for the commission to consider whether those hurdles are too high or whether or not that's okay. But in general, we have kind of cut out most of the ones. That's why compared to other communities, I would say we do not hardly ever recommend denial of projects. Whereas in other communities where I've worked, you recommended denial on a lot of them because people would not withdraw. People, I think, respect our expertise in reviewing the code and looking at it and telling them that we don't think this is going to fly or that this is going to be a problem or that it's just not allowed. And so that's why you usually see projects that are either a recommendation of approval or recommendations with conditions attached. The last part, which I think is important, is that we try to make sure that the Planning Commission understands your options when you're getting ready to make that decision on this application. We try to let you know whether or not, that you have those options to approve with conditions, to deny it. The thing that I would say that we may not do well from that standpoint is maybe helping the commission understand that if you are going to make a decision that is maybe counter to what we're recommending, might be how you would try to tee that up, how you would maybe make the motion, how you would state for the record what your findings of facts are so that it can be put into the Planning and Zoning Commission resolution that we would then want Jeremy to put together for you that would identify where you believed it didn't meet the review criteria, what factors contributed to the decision that was made, so that that is in that record for any appeal, whether it go to planning or to city council or to court, so that that information is present. So that's one thing that I know, and at least from my time here, that I would say I don't know that we have done well or even tried to provide that with you or to you. It has not been in any way meant to prevent you from doing that. It's just that typically, again, from our standpoint, we're writing these and trying to give you PZRs that are ready to go. We don't know what you would find in a denial. That's why we usually leave the ability for you to add in what would not be okay and where you would find things not to meet review criteria. Our staff recommendation, hopefully, you understand where we're at from the evaluation criteria analysis. We have tried to explain why we believe it meets those review criteria in the analysis in the staff report. So typically we are making our recommendation. If the recommendation is for conditional approval, we're trying to make sure that we've provided you what those conditions are, and hopefully it's been explained in the review criteria as to why we're making those. And then finally are the attachments. These, over my almost 25 years of working here, have varied over the years. We have had packets that used to go out that were as big as the Land Development Code, 400 pages. I think Jane's had a few of those here recently where we've gotten that big. We tried to pare some of that back because we didn't think that some of those things were being looked at by the commission. I think every commission's different. Everybody has maybe different things that they focus on, different expertise, different knowledge. If there are things that you think that we should be including in our attachments, we'd just like to know what they are. You may not know what everything we get, but that's another thing that we can provide you through general correspondence back and forth, would be information that lists out the various information that we get for applications. And then if it is submitted with a specific type of application and we know that you'd like to have that as part of the record, we can include that. So a couple of things just real quick. So some of the benefits of the way that we currently do our staff reports is, one, it's the consistency. Definitely, I think, is helpful not only for the commission, the council, but also if you go in through any of our old staff reports, the current format that we have right now has probably been around for about 15 years. And before that, I've only had it, I've had two since I've worked here, and they're very similar. If you go back and look in our old files and see them, they're going to be laid out very similarly. And that's just the way that we have tried to do it, to make sure that they're legally defensible. They provide the information that they're supposed to. So that's all part of it. We're trying to make sure that we're informing you guys, the decision-making body, whether that's you as the planning commission here or when we include the PZ packet to the city council so that they have the information. We're trying to encourage public participation. We want the public to understand why we're making the recommendation, to see the rules that they're being based on, to understand those criteria. They may have a different view that review criteria, in my opinion, doesn't meet the standard, and that's fair. Compatibility, if we asked every one of you, would probably be something different depending on what the application is, and that's okay. And so just understand, from our standpoint, we're trying to give you our best professional determination, but you are here to be the deciders. And if you agree that there's a different decision to be made, that's okay. You know, we're not going to take it personally or anything like that. We're here to help you get through this information and make the right decision. Okay. And I'll let you read the rest of those there. But the biggest one is it establishes for us a record that can be given to a court if we ever were challenged and had to go to court for a decision that the commission and the city council made related to a land use decision. So these are some of the things I'd ask you to think about a little bit as I turn it back over to Chairman Height. And if there's anything on this list that you think that you'd like to talk about or give us some input on, love to hear it. And I'm here to answer questions, but mostly to hear what you guys think about the way these are laid out and how we can try to improve them. So, that's my presentation.
Thank you, Don. The MC has a few questions to start with. First of which is, it's occurred to me off and on through the years that the DRC or the staff recommendation that comes in is a recommendation that I sometimes view as somewhat vested in approval, which strikes me as odd because it's a decision that's supposed to be made by the commission, and there's an advocate for the applicant presenting to us, and I sometimes think it should be more neutral
Sure.
than the advocacy part of it.
Yeah.
But I also appreciate that you do weed through a lot of chaff to bring us good wheat that you have nurtured to bring it to this stage. Sorry for that metaphor. Is there a way to present this without a recommendation?
We could. I mean, I'll be honest with you. I've had this discussion, although not recently, with some staff in the past about the way that they have presented even the presentation itself, right? My concern has always been that the presentation we provide should not necessarily be biased one way or the other. It should be facts. It should be the factual information that we have to present to you related to this project. The selling of the project should happen from the applicant and their consultants. And nothing kills me more than when a applicant comes here and they don't have any consultants sitting in there with them. They don't have a presentation and they go, we're just here to answer questions. Because that's not my staff's job, isn't to act or to be their advocate for their project. So could we just present this to you without a recommendation? Yeah, we can. I don't know that there's a specific legal item or section in the code that says we are supposed to make a recommendation. We could confirm that with Jeremy from that standpoint, but as far as I know, there isn't any.
I mean, I'm not so sure I necessarily don't want a recommendation. I'm just wondering what that would look like. I think I also appreciate, I've seen at least one recommendation of denial and it came forward and it didn't pass. But to know where staff sits, that's 99.999% recommending approval. I suppose I probably want to know the one that's not going to be proposed for approval. Thank you.
Yeah.
That said, too, I find when I sit down to read them, the introductory information, it's very important to me to have a bigger vicinity map so I know exactly kind of where this is.
Okay.
Sometimes I get a picture of the block. That's not helpful to me. I would like to know more broadly where this is in the city. Also, as I'm reviewing this, and I know the review criteria come in, but they're at the back. I kind of want to know where that is up front as I'm reading
Okay.
to see, and not in the nuanced detail that's in the back where you're going through and making a recommendation and identifying through all those characteristics, but that we are the deciding body or referral body is
Okay.
helpful. Kind of what the standards are. This is a big project and there's a variance request. Those broad brush things are helpful when you're reviewing the information up front. And then I also think it's well stated, but a problem of being more fact-specific or fact-dependent when we come up with a denial. Because that's a decision that also needs to be supported.
Yeah.
And I don't know how you'd help us in that regard, but it would be helpful. Hey, we're recommending approval, but if you're not gonna approve, you need to identify what are the criteria, or maybe we just need to be taught that.
Yeah.
What are the criteria are not being met so that your decision is defensible at city council or court? Thank you. Any others?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. All right, so two comments. One, following up, Mr. Chairman, on your comments about the recommendation. I do like having a recommendation in there, mostly so that there's consistency when the time is that they don't recommend it. So that there's, that's not an anomaly in the format, that there's always, a recommendation regardless of what it is. Recognize the conflict potentially and the way you're talking about it, but that's at least where I fall. And did want to talk about attachments as well. There's a lot of attachments. I'm not going to tell you that there's too many though, because I do think they're really valuable. Admittedly, I'm relatively new to this, so I haven't seen a lot of them, but so a specific example, like there were in the Quick Trip discussion, there were comments from neighbors about traffic. It
Okay.
was really important to me that there was a traffic study in that packet, which there was. Does that mean that every single application would need a traffic study, even if there's no concerns by anybody through the process? No, not necessarily.
Okay.
Even though if you require it in the development process, your review process. But I think that if there is any concern, if the public has raised the concern, if staff has raised the concern, then that's really helpful backing
Okay.
for us to be able to look at. And I know that's a squishy test, but I still think it's kind of important.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense.
I would agree with some visuals in the report. I do think the attachments have a lot of them, which is enormously helpful. But some sort of standardization, even in the attachments, to make sure we're seeing the same kind of visuals would be great.
Could you give me an example, just so I make sure I'm following you there on a visual for that?
I'm a map person personally.
Okay.
So I find myself almost no matter what, I'm going to look the address on a Google Maps. So,
Okay.
Big picture, where does it sit in the city? As
Okay.
the chairman noted, kind of zooming into a neighborhood view and then, as relevant block or, however that looks, just so we have that context as we're going down
Okay.
a little bit more. This was not one of your questions, but I'm still gonna. This is probably, I noticed it more on the Board of Adjustment communication than the planning and zoning. The first page of the Board of Adjustment communication, the biggest portion there is the statute that allows us to act as the BOA.
Yeah.
I feel like that should be at the end.
Okay.
Because I think the normal packet is actually pretty well prioritized, and I like that you have general information, applicant information, contact info right up front, and you're outlining facts of what this is. And so, and that's where we're going to focus our time. And, when we get through a 10-page packet or a 10-page, report, we're processing better at the front than the end.
Yeah.
So the things that are rote standard
Yep.
towards the end, I think, is helpful.
Okay.
But, and I don't think that's different than what you're doing in the P&Z packet. It stood out to me in the BOA packet.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think part of that right now is just because of the newness a little bit for everybody involved, because the BOA cases that you've heard here this year really are the first ones we've had in almost 5 years. So that's how long it had been since we'd had any, since before COVID. And before that, we actually had a functioning Board of Adjustment. So, but I would agree with you. I think we've got it one time. Now let's move it to the down below.
That may just be my biases.
Nope,
I'm
I
seeing this,
think
so I
it's a good
expect to
comment.
always see it.
So,
but no,
yeah.
no. In general, I appreciate the work the staff is doing on the reports. I think they're enormously helpful and valuable, and particularly for someone new, to have some consistency in how it's displayed has been really helpful to me.
Good. Good.
So, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
How you doing? I'm gonna pick on Quick Trip just a little bit. In our January meeting, when you guys brought that packet to us, it was right at the top. It says project title, Quick Trip Conditional Use Site Plan, CUSP. And then it had the three kind of variances they're asking for in terms of lighting, transparency, and landscaping. Had they not wanted those things outside of the standards, is that still coming to us as a communication without being a conditional use site plan?
The request or the land use of a gas station would still have required a conditional use site plan to be approved by the commission. So even if they met every standard, no variances, no modifications requested, you still would have reviewed that and been asked to make a decision on that land use.
So let me contrast that to some outbuildings near Costco that have come up recently. There's
Okay.
like Don's Hot Chicken or whatever it is out there, and those don't come through us then.
That's correct.
Okay.
So there are some restaurants, for example, that are sit down that are not drive through. Drive through specifically, like the McDonald's out at Sandstone, out by Walmart East. That one required a conditional use because of the drive through itself.
Okay.
That use was determined to need to go through a public hearing process and be evaluated by the Planning Commission. But if it would have been a sit-down restaurant, no drive-through, wouldn't have mattered whether it was a McDonald's or name any other kind of restaurant. It would have been a restaurant. It would have been a site plan reviewed by staff.
Okay. So that's commercial. Are all residential developments brought through us?
No,
Okay.
no. So as an example, a single-family residential development, single-family subdivision, would typically come before you as a preliminary plat. The exception now that council has approved is whether if they're going to provide affordable housing on site, actually construct it in that development and meet the standards, council has said they can skip going to planning commission. They can go straight to final plat. In some cases, multifamily and townhomes would come here for you. There are certain zones where those are conditional uses or conditional secondary uses, where you guys would need to make an evaluation of whether or not the proposed use on that property is the right land use, and does it meet the standards, and are there any negative impacts associated with that development on the adjacent properties.
If I could,
Mm-hmm.
Ninth and Pace, how did that did come up?
Yeah, so that's an example of where the property was zoned for the residential mixed neighborhood, RMN, that allowed for small multifamily to be allowed as a permitted use. Council did that to try to, back when we did the last code update in 2018, they specifically, one of the things that they wanted was for us to allow smaller type of apartment uses, rental, to be allowed as a use by right, not have to go through a public process. So there are certain zones where it is allowed, it's done staff level through a site plan. There are some places where it will come to you and you would review it depending on the zoning. Typically that's going to be the like the industrial zoning district areas, some of the areas where there could be a negative impact by putting residential next to an existing factory or some other kind of use that could be negatively impacted by having residential.
So what percentage of developments would you say come through us as a percentage of the total that go through city council?
Okay, so I'll break it into three types.
Okay.
The first type would be administrative, which would be Grant gets to approve it. Doesn't come here.
Okay.
Second is planning commission's the decision maker. Third type is city council's the ultimate decision maker. So I would say in a typical year, if we process about 100 projects through the DRC, I would wager that you're looking at 5% probably go to the city council. I would say 10-15% probably come here, and the rest are administrative.
Okay. And that brought up one last question on the Quick Trip. How did that work with city council being the ultimate decider on that particular project?
Sure, because they appealed your denial. That was their form of relief. So you were the deciders. You made the decision to deny the application. So instead of letting the applicant then go to district court and file with the court to ask for relief, our code is set up that the council is the next step before they can go to court. So that gives the council the ability then to review and make a determination as to whether or not they believe the commission acted correctly.
And that's for any and all things that come through this board.
Anything that comes here that you are the decision maker on. So preliminary plats, conditional uses, those are the two things that you are and variances. Those are the ones that you're the deciders on. And then anything else that goes through like annexations, rezonings, land use amendments. There's a couple other things. The city council is the decider.
And the McDonald's out east, that got kicked back to us. Was that just a thing where on one project, council said, we want to kick it back, and the other one said, screw them, we're just going to do it anyway?
So the nuance there, trying to be as politically correct as I can here for you, is that the land use attorney that was hired for McDonald, as you may recall, for those of you that were here, the applicant's consultant was sick the night of their presentation. They had a backup person who did the presentation along with, I think, the consultant's like president or something was here. McDonald's was here, and their presentation was pretty, say, condensed. You denied it. You made a finding that they didn't address the review criteria, that they did not meet what was required of them in order to be approved. When they went to and prepared for planning commission, they entered in a whole bunch of brand new information into the record. And the attorney's office said, you can't do that. This decision is made on the information that you presented at the hearing and the decision that the commission made. We're not going to look at this as give us all the information you should have gave the planning commission. So they were, through their attorney, informed that they might be better off to ask the commission if they would remand it back to you so that they could try counsel, so that council could remand it back to you so that you could reconsider, have a new hearing and consider all of their new evidence that they didn't present and see if you were able to make a different decision. And that's how it came back to you.
Okay, that's very helpful.
Hopefully I keep my job tomorrow. We'll see.
And I kind of agree with Commissioner or Chair Height in that it is tough when they're giving a presentation and in the materials we've got, it says we recommend this. So it's us kind of looking out at all you with them all kind of looking at us like, yeah, and so I don't know. I appreciate the recommendation from staff. I do, but
Yeah.
I could see them kind of going, these guys they're with us. What do you guys, come on, let's do this thing.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And again, that's where I think we need, and this to me, I think would be a good, I don't know whether or not it'd be an executive session with you, with Jeremy, from a legal advice standpoint, or whether or not it's something we would want to do in public. But I do think it would be very helpful for the commission to be given some information on how to create the record for a denial, especially if you're going against what's in the
Right.
communication, right? About, that their traffic consultant stated that this and this was going to happen. Well, in our review of that does not address this review criteria.
Right.
We don't find that it's met. That, based on the information presented from the neighbors, that we don't believe this is compatible. And these are the reasons why we think it's not compatible, right? So I think we don't do you a very good service if we don't give you those tools to be able to make a decision that then is defensible at the next level. And so, and then also just to add real quick, and I'll let you go,
That's
is
okay.
the other thing is making sure that then that you would make a request of legal counsel to put that into a PZR for you to consider at the next regular meeting to make sure it documents everything that you stated in that hearing before you make your final decision, right? Because making it that night at 12:01 or whatever time we get to sometimes, right? Versus having time to give feedback to the attorney, let him write that up for you. You have a chance to review it and then make a motion of like, well, I think that we should also add X in. We talked about this and that's not in here. I think that's important so that it's fresh. It's something you have a chance to think about before you vote on that and make that final decision. So,
Because that one, I mean, Quick Trip, yeah, you could cite some things from Envision Longmont, but on the other hand, we could just look at a map and go, why is there a gas station going in here? Kind of thing. You know, it's quantitative versus qualitative kind of thing.
yeah.
And I know they'd rather have, from a legal perspective, yes, it doesn't match a mixed use, this criteria, the A, B, and C, but I don't know. Some was kind of a gut check as well, you know?
And that's where I think too the discussion amongst the commission sometimes where I've heard people who have made the comment of, you know, I just don't feel like this works, right?
Right.
Like this is the place for this, or that you know, based on the feedback we've gotten, I just don't think this is right. This is appropriate, but I can't put my finger on how to state it. You may have others on the commission that feel the same way, who may throw out some ideas of, well, I believe it's because of these three things that it doesn't meet it. And that might be the discussion point where it starts a motion. You know, I move that we deny or direct the city attorney to draft a denial PZR, making the finding of these three things as to why we are denying it.
Okay.
And then you can get feedback like, well, I'd like to make a friendly amendment. I'd also like to add a fourth item, right? Because I think that there were other things that were stated that I want to get into the record.
Okay.
So there's ways to do it.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Don.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Don, I'm going to keep this short, at least as far as I think what's included is good. It's a lot. I'll be honest, I don't go through every single page,
Sure.
but I think it's necessary because, like for landscaping, there are probably things that Commissioner Saunders looks at that I wouldn't look at.
Right.
But it needs to be in there for us all to look at. As I think you mentioned, we all have little specialties, little things that grab us.
Yeah.
So I think what's in there is needed.
Okay.
As far as visuals, maybe some more street scenes, like from the north, from the south, and maybe make it a little more, it's the same every time we get it. So as part of the packet, we know we're going to get a north-south or street view or something.
Okay.
Just so we can see the street view and get a real good picture of where it's going in and what it's going next to.
Sure. Okay.
So as far as that, one of the questions I have, or one of the things I'd like a comment on, it kind of involves this, is the fact that we get the packet a week ahead of time. We start reviewing it. And I know I've made a couple comments to commissioners in the past because they asked about questions. And my thought was that if it's going to be a question that you think is going to take time for somebody to dig up the information on, that would be a good time in that week prior to give you guys some heads up, like, I have this question, and give you guys time to get an answer for it. Is that kind of how you would like it to be done?
Yes, we really appreciate it, both from the commission and from council, and we get them occasionally from everyone here. And I would say that having the ability for us to make sure that we have the exact section of code that you're trying to find out where it's applicable, or make sure that if there was some discrepancy in the report, we can explain, yes, it is this, it's not this. We really appreciate those heads up. So an email to Jane, not to everybody, just to Jane, would be wonderful. She forwards those to us so that we can work on getting those responses. When we respond, we want to respond through her back to you so that the whole commission can see it. But understand, we also, what my expectation and what I want of my staff is I want them to bring up what that question was in the hearing. Because you might have neighbors who had the exact same question, but didn't know that you sent us an email, that we reviewed it, wrote you a nice paragraph. You now have the information, but they still haven't even heard it yet. So just understand that's what I would hope we would follow through on, is explain. We also want to note to everyone at home and on the audience, we received this question. This was the answer to that question. the whole commission has that information, just so that no one has information that no one else in the public doesn't have.
Thank you. And then a final comment, if we do have some kind of executive session, one of the other things I think we should probably do is review what our options are, as far as not necessarily having to approve or not approve, but postponing and going over the way that that is to be done and what our options are for that. Because as you mentioned, I mean, there are times we get to 11, 12 o'clock and we start feeling like there's a pressure, like we have to make a decision on this right away.
Yeah.
I know that's not the case, but it's a pressure. So if maybe in that executive session, if we can go over what our options are as far as postponing it and,
Yeah.
and all that.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. And I'll also state some of the things that I've heard previously from meetings that have gone long is that we lose folks.
Yeah.
People that know that the meeting starts at 7, they're here at 7. They don't realize it's the last thing on the agenda, and it doesn't get up until 10, but they left at the break at 8:30 because they were like, I can't stay here. I've got other obligations. I've got kids to get to bed, homework to help with, or food, or whatever it is, right? And so I think, we have 11 o'clock end time that takes a vote to continue. That was to try to make sure that you're not going on and on, through the night, to give you an out, so to speak. But I would also say it's also for those folks that we want to participate. If we're starting meetings on a topic at 10 o'clock, I guarantee you've probably lost a lot of them that have already left because they're not going to stick around that long and give you their whole night. They're just not. So continuing or postponing or the other options that we have, I think that'd be great to have discussion on.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair, or MC. Whatever was working. MC Hammer. Thank you, Don, for putting this together. I really
Sure.
appreciate. We're informal tonight, right?
Yeah.
Is that all right? Okay,
Yeah,
sorry.
we're good.
I'm going to go through your little list real quick. I do like the standardization. I think that's really helpful.
Okay.
To see the same over and over again. It makes it easy to read. I also appreciate you sort of doing the homework for me and finding out what it is that I can't put my finger on, what I'm missing in the packet. It is that context. I know that you all see application after application. When I start looking at my packets, I look through this, and I don't know if everybody knows that this exists, the development handbook, and I look and see what the applicants are submitting, sort of drawings and not always, so I don't want to put myself, but that's where I'm at. And so missing that context in those conversations, because that collaboration can be a quagmire for sure with the applicants and the other staff members, but sort of maybe knowing what happened can help get to context very quickly instead of having to go through all the documents and all the attachments and, okay, where were the parts that didn't come about or what things came about more quickly. So I like the idea of an executive summary. Maybe that's where that can be sort of given that context, and maybe the recommendation can be promulgated there as well. Of like, you can kind of get the nuance of where staff is headed with their thoughts on this project rather than getting the recommendation. Because I'm on the fence for that too.
Yeah.
Sometimes I feel like, well, if you're recommending for approval, but I'm recommending for denial, like, are we butting heads? Do you know what I mean? So I know that we don't because we say that it's not personal, but I think there's a little bit of that nuance here
Right.
that, we're going against what did staff miss? And I don't think that's what we're trying to do here. We're not trying to, we got you, you missed something, because we're all people and we all make mistakes. But I do think what you're saying of sometimes we've got that gut or we've kind of got denial, but we can't quite put it together.
Yeah.
I think it would be helpful without having to go against staff recommendations. So maybe that together in the executive summary would be helpful. And the denials. I like that idea sort of at the end. We get the recommendation, okay, A, B, and C, you can deny. But then what happens, right? Or how do we word it? And I was thinking maybe there's a general example of a denial, like in a past case, this is what happened, maybe speaking generally rather than specific to this project and calling out, it could be denial here, here, and here, or we've had a case for a conditional use where in the past it needed 3 steps of denial or 3 pieces of code to get to that denial. I don't know, just spitballing.
Yeah, and what I'm taking away from that, and
Yeah.
I'm just giving you an example, is at the end, for example, the chair after every application that's appealable, right?
Yeah.
There's the statement that's read, right? And you kind of fill in some blanks.
Mm-hmm.
So if there was a kind of a guide to help the commission phrase it in a way that gives Jeremy the direction that he needs to be able to then act on the commission's behalf to draft the resolution, as well as then table that item until the next meeting so that you have an opportunity to review that, having that written out in a way that any of you who made that motion could look at that and kind of follow along, that would
That would be really helpful,
Yeah.
I think, too, because I think you're hitting it right, the nail on the head of like it gets to be 10:30, 10:45, and we're just getting to sort of the meat and potatoes of the
Yeah.
project. But then I don't know how to word it. I've
Right.
had a lot of them
Yeah.
where I'm like, I know it's this, and this, but I don't know how. And people are trying to help, but it's getting
Sure.
late. So I didn't know
Yeah.
that we could have that option to talk to Jeremy and say, can you help us draft this? If there's enough of people that are in support of that motion
Yep.
to draft something based off of our recommendations. So I think that is really helpful and takes that pressure off. And I think you're right of letting public invited to be heard is really important. But if we're going to 11:30, 12 o'clock at night, you lose a lot of your viewing audience and people need to, it's a long drawn out process and not everybody knows or is has that endurance for it
Yes.
either. So, okay, great. So I added my little list here. I like the P&Z statute, reminder of what we're doing here and what our scope is. I think that's really important.
Okay.
Denial, look at that. And then I guess for attachments, some I don't think are all that relevant. I think one that shall remain nameless had like 600 pages of mailing addresses. I did not find that all that relevant, but it was annoying to me to have to get through it to get to the next thing. That could just be my process in reviewing packets. I do think what's helpful, though, for anything with attachments or visuals, why am I seeing this?
Sure.
Why is this important? Why do I need it?
Yep.
Go ahead.
So just real quick, for everyone's understanding, one, I think what we should be doing, and we can obviously make a better effort at making sure this happens, is trying to put those items like the mailing list at the back, right?
Yeah.
Like that would be the
Yeah.
last one. So you don't have to scroll through 300 pages before
Or like
you
a
finally
link
get.
to them, but I don't know if that's
So,
even possible.
so the main reason
Yeah.
why we include those is that, and for those who've been on the commission long enough, is that if we ever have someone who shows up and makes the statement that they did not receive adequate notice,
No, I get why
have
it
to
was
stop,
there.
right?
Yeah, it was important for that one too.
And-
but I just didn't know if it needed to be like PDF'd with all of them. But maybe that's just a nuance that I don't.
having it in the
Understand.
record already, if it's raised, we don't have to supplement the record.
Gotcha.
That's the only thing. But I would agree. I don't think it needs to be in the middle of between the letter to the planning commission and the actual, site plan that you're reviewing. It should be at the very end, in my opinion.
Yeah, and maybe that's
so we
just-
can look for those things.
Yeah, because I usually just go through the whole packet because I sort of feel like that's how you're telling me the story of the
Yeah.
project is going
Yes.
through it that way. So yeah, I agree with you putting that at the end. But I think those are all my comments. So I really do appreciate you putting the time into doing this and
Yeah.
making it more efficient for us. Because I know you guys sit on some of these projects for years and years and years, and you know them like
Yeah.
the back of your hand, and we're just coming to it over a weekend.
Yeah.
So I really, would push for getting more context, and then options for direction at the end would be helpful, along with that scope to remind us.
Yeah, and that's and again, we try when we review these, as a group. I can tell you that that's the one thing that I think that you hit on that's the most important for our staff to understand is you are looking at this the first time. And so you little things that we may have that you don't could make a world of difference, and we need to remember that. And so I think those are good talking points to my staff. So
Yeah, like
thank
that
you.
executive summary, I think is an interesting idea that you
Yeah.
have that I would like to see, try it out maybe.
Sounds good.
right,
I
thank
think we
you.
could do that. Thanks.
I appreciate it, MC. So I guess I'd go through some of my comments. You asked the question, what sections are most useful? And I definitely find that the front end of the P&Z packets has a lot of useful information. I mean, the Envision Longmont alignment, relevant applicable codes, all of that I find very useful to just like sanity check this project, like clears what the goal of the commission is. Does it align with what commission, with the Envision Longmont, the important things for the council. So I find that to be extremely useful. One area where I personally, I think, and I don't know how much work this would be to improve. You do have a section that outlines the attachments, but sometimes I find in myself like trying to find the attachments in the packet is like difficult. I wonder if maybe there we could just list like page numbers, like the attachment 1 spans from maybe this page in the packet to this page in the packet, just so it's like, okay, I want to find attachment 6, I can quickly find it in the packet. But if that is going to be a lot of work to add in, I could see that being not worth it.
One, and I'm kind of asking, Jane's our guru here for the packet. I don't know that we would know the page numbers until it's compiled digitally, but I'm wondering whether or not we used to do the attachments separately back before we were in the system we are now, to where you would actually you would find attachment 1, and attachment 1 was its own PDF, attachment 2, and so on. So it wasn't that it was just compiled all as one big document. You had the staff report, and then you could click on that link to open up the mailing list if you wanted to look at that, or the site plan if you wanted to go to that.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's a way that we could do something like that.
Actually, yeah, there, just as you mentioned, the HTML agenda, when you go into the agenda management portal, when you open that, you can click on an item and it will pull up each individual attachment separated. There's a PDF option to pull up the entire packet as a PDF, but when you hit that HTML agenda right at the very beginning on the agenda management portal, click on the item, it'll pull up all your attachments individually labeled just as they are in the staff report.
Okay.
It's not an exact science. Don't click on the paperclip on that page because it won't do anything. You need to kind of click on the title of the item and it'll give you a drop down below it that will show all of the attachments, individual PDFs of all of the attachments.
I see. I did not know that. Thank you.
Yeah, don't click
Good
the
job,
paperclip.
Jane.
It's very deceiving. Don't do the paperclip.
All right.
Well, then that's solved. Thank you. Let's see, what other comments did I have? I think it was talked about by other commissioners, but I do agree that I think having a more robust motion that better outlines what our decision points would be helpful. Like, not to harp on the Quick Trip, I was going back and looking at the Quick Trip motion, and it literally has one item that it does not comply with. What was it? Let me pull it up. Sorry. That it didn't comply with the multi-use, the variety of uses laid out in the zone, and that was the only item that was our reason for rejection presented to council. So with that in light, that might make some sense, but I don't think that one item truly captures the hours of discussion we had.
Correct. You're right.
So I think, yeah, it might be worth looking at ways to either bring it back next session and have us review it over the week and maybe present other items that could be added to that motion to clarify what we think the important decision points were for the record. And I know you mentioned some of the planning process, and I understand that that is, at least from what I understand, that's a long process. I mean, can be months to a year, whatever.
Yeah.
And I think that adding all of the records from that would be like overkill. But I do wonder if maybe there's some way to add like important decision points or important modifications that came out of that process, just like a summary there. So it's like maybe it comes before the commission and we're wondering, why was this decision made? Maybe maybe there is a reason why, and it was a compromise to make this or this happen. I'm sure that happens on a bunch of plans where
Yeah.
there's like a decision point,
Yep.
but that might not be immediately clear to commission just reading through the packet, you know?
Yeah. No, I think we could add that into the DRC section.
Okay.
So that you could understand not only the length of time, but then what were some of those action points or decision points that were made or issues that were worked out to better understand kind of the complexity of the development application.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think that's the main comments I had. Other than that, I do really appreciate the in-depth nature of the packet. Good to know about the HTML packet. I do think having at least for me, I find having the very comprehensive packet is nice, so that if there is any areas where I am curious, it generally is there. I don't have to shoot you guys questions. I can just find it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Really quick, this is 30 seconds at most. I use the HTML agenda. I find it enormously helpful. I like having the individual attachments. I would love if the file names correspond to the agenda order. So particularly when there's multiple hearings.
Yeah.
So it's 7A or 7B. Otherwise, I find I'm going through my downloads folder and I have Planning and Zoning Commission.
Oh, okay. Now-
Communication form 7
Yep.
that's downloaded, and I have no clue which one that's for, so I have to go back and refind it. And that's super nitpicky, but it saves me from having to rename files, and so I would appreciate that.
I think we could do that. That's not a big issue.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Don, I think the packet is, for me, it's like 90% there. I just wanted to comment on the recommendation versus not recommendation thing. When you are recommending for, or maybe very rarely against, I'm sure there are reasons for that. I think that in the executive summary, just commenting on those reasons neutrally, saying we do not find that there's any conflict with Envision Longmont, or if you do disagree with it, outlining what that is, rather than saying we're yay or nay. This is what we notice. That way, I think it's important to put it in the applicant's corner to self-advocate.
Yeah.
And that was everything I had.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Thanks. So I really appreciate the evaluation criteria or criteria evaluation that you guys put into the packets, especially the sections where the code is relevant, because that points us to go into the code itself. Or if we want to go look it up, we could go read the code ourselves.
Yeah.
And going back to the attachments, and this goes back to Commissioner Height and Earl's comments about the vicinity maps. The first thing I do whenever I look at this stuff is, instead of looking at the vicinity maps is okay, but I actually go into Google Maps also, and more specifically, I go to the county assessor's map
Okay.
to go look at the exact outlines of the plot that
Yeah.
we were talking about. So if you have like an overlay of that, the plots with the aerial views, that would be really nice.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair. I just have a quick question for you, John. When you're talking about what goes on the record, anything that's in our packets on the record, nothing that's left out would be, I don't know, brought back to be on the record, something that the applicant has submitted as part of their permitting or review process that we haven't seen. Would that still be part of the record? Oh, I'm sorry. I thought that was.
We'll probably want to check with
Okay.
Jeremy. What I would say is there's a couple things to keep in mind. One, we have modified recently, within I think the last year, we've modified our PZRs to state that anything that's presented by the applicant at the hearing becomes a part of the record.
Okay.
So if they make statements like, "We will do X,"
Yeah.
it's not in the packet, it's not on their plans, but they state that to you, that becomes a part of the record. It states that in the PZR and in the city council ordinances now when we go forward with those. I'm trying to think of the things that we don't include that would be something that we would need. So as an example, let's say, and I could go way deep in a rabbit hole here, but I'll just try not to because we got another presentation here. Let's say that there was that the neighbors were concerned with the drainage,
Okay.
but there was nothing in our report with the drainage. I think my recommendation would be to the commission is that you continue that hearing and you ask staff to provide information related to the topic that is not covered in your packet. That way we could amend the packet, give you the additional information. If there were questions that you wanted us to address, we could do that in a supplemental planning commission communication to you. Then that would become a part of the record. That way, if you deny it, it's in the record, and that information then would go not only to the city council, but then if it goes to court,
Okay. Because they would already, the applicant would already have some sort of drainage report or
Yes.
drainage plan, but we hadn't seen it.
Correct.
Okay.
And if there,
Great example.
And here's an example referring back to the handbook, right? It might say that we need a multimodal transportation plan, right? But on an individual site of an acre, we may have at the pre-app said, well, the planning commission just saw this preliminary plat 3 months ago. And there was a multimodal transportation plan that showed how it was going to tie into the entire network in this neighborhood. So we may have waived that. But if you're going to base it on a multimodal decision, right, then I think that there might be a need to either get evidence, either that be staff bringing back the information from the original hearing, or giving the applicant the ability to try to create that and bring it back so that you can look at it. You still may make a finding it's inadequate, but at least you would have the information that we had waived at the pre-app because we didn't think it was necessary, or that was going to be the issue that the whole project was going to be tied up on. So I would just say if you get to one of those, continuing asking us to get that information and bring it back would be my recommendation to make sure it's in the record before you make a decision.
Anything more? Unanimous. We'll close this agenda item.
Can I,
And I turn my microphone back on. Yes, Director Penn.
since I was afforded ample time to do research based upon the discussion surrounding recommendations, our major application review procedures do include specifically a recommendation to
From
the
staff.
commission. Correct.
Okay,
There you got it.
so now
All right.
we know that we need to know that information. But can
Unless
it
the
be more
code was
neutral?
changed. I think there's flexibility in the recommendation, absolutely.
Okay,
Yes.
great. Well, thank you. Anything more?
Thank you all. I appreciate all your time and efforts, and have a great rest of your night.
Thank you, Don. I think we move on now to item 6B, which is concepts relating to single-family attached as a permitted land use within the residential single-family or RSF zoning district. Principal Planner Nathan Jones Meyer is going to present to us. Thank you. Floor is yours.
All right. Good evening, Commissioners. As Chairman Hyde said, my name is Nathan Jones Meyer. I'm Principal Planner here with the Planning Development Services Department. The item that I'll be presenting tonight is a discussion item that is a result of some discussion that took place at the February 19th Planning and Zoning Commission. The request was for staff to take a look at our existing code standards as they relate to single-family attached land uses and what the process would be to add that land use to our permitted use table, specifically in the residential single-family zoning district. So that's what we've done. We've taken a look at some of our code standards, and this is meant to be more of an open discussion. So I have a section at the end for questions and answers if you'd like, but if I hit on a topic that you'd like to stop me and we can chit-chat a little bit as I move through the presentation, feel free to do so. And before I get too far ahead of myself, I'd just like to say it's my first presentation to this board, and I am very much looking forward to continuing to work with y'all. So just to kind of go over what I've prepared for y'all tonight, we'll go through an overview of the existing LDC, so land development code requirements as they relate to single-family attached and residential single-family. We've taken a look at our other sections of the code to see what other impacts may be appropriate for the commission to take a look at if y'all were to move forward with any sort of text amendments. We also took a look at what other cities in our area have done and provided some analysis there. And then finally, we'll go through the actual technical process for the Planning and Zoning Commission to initiate a code text amendment. Then we'll end with questions and next steps. So the Land Development Code includes purpose statements for all of our different zoning districts. The purpose statement for the residential single-family zoning district is it's intended to establish and preserve residential neighborhoods with primarily single-family detached dwellings on medium to larger lots. This district is intended to be located in proximity to centers and other public amenities or complementary uses and activities such as schools, parks, and open space. So what that essentially means is it sets the tone for all the site design and development standards that would apply within that zoning district. The purpose statement in and of itself doesn't necessarily include any sort of requirements. It doesn't, in this case, say that a single family detached is the only land use that would be allowed, but it is one of those qualitative statements that kind of sets the overall intent of the zoning district. And as we go through some of the site design standards, you'll see that they're really, they were intentionally designed to meet that goal of predominantly single family detached. So any changes to that, you may want to take a look at what some of those other site design standards are, so that it would be more in conformance with the purpose. So as such, like I said, it does allow very few, relatively few land uses. It allows single family detached. It also allows ADUs, group homes, daycares, assembly uses. So assembly would be religious assembly, so churches and things like that. And then also other civic uses, so parks and open spaces. So ADUs are allowed. We are currently in the process of updating our ADU regulations to be in conformance with the state legislature, the changes to ADUs that have been passed at the state level. So the intent there is to really streamline the ADU approval process and try to make it a little bit easier for a property owner to construct an ADU on their property if they so choose to. But ADUs are currently allowed in the residential single-family zoning district. So for our lot standards, you'll see as part of our backup, I included a few summary charts of what our existing code standards are and how they compare to some of our other zoning districts. You'll see that the residential single-family zone, the lot standards in there are going to be a little bit, but not too bigger than than other lot standards that would apply to zoning districts that allow for denser development. One thing you may want to take a look at when you're considering any changes to not just this specific issue, but any sort of zoning change or text change would be things like minimum lot width, setbacks, minimum lot size. So currently in the zoning districts that do allow for attached, single-family attached, they're not required to, but they are oftentimes, you'll have your typical duplex, and there may be the request to subdivide the land so that each dwelling unit is on its own individual lot. Well, the way we got there was that there's no side yard setback requirement for single-family attached, and so there's nothing that would be in conflict with having the actual building on top of the lot line. But again, with other than the side yard setbacks, the front yard setbacks, rear yard setbacks, all of those are in the residential single-family zoning district. They are very similar to other residential zone districts. Now to go through our current standards for single-family attached. So single-family attached is a specific use. It's not the same thing as a zoning district. It is at least not in our code. It is a specific. It refers to a specific housing type, and as such, we have a pretty specific definition for it. It's defined as up to 4 horizontally attached dwelling units. So these dwelling units cannot be vertically stacked. They're typically separated by a vertical party wall, and it's only up to 4 dwelling units. They're allowed by right in the residential mixed neighborhood district, so that's going to be the next zoning district, the next more intense zoning district. And it's permitted as a secondary use in our residential multifamily zoning district, and all of our mixed-use zoning districts. You may be aware of our secondary uses, but essentially what that means is that when it's generally permitted by right, which would mean that, like Don mentioned earlier, if a development application were to request a townhouse type project in an area that's permitted as a secondary use, we wouldn't necessarily say that the use needs to be approved by the Planning and Zoning Commission. We would take a look at all the different secondary uses in the area and make sure that in conformance with the code, there's still area in the zoning district to allow for primary uses. And then, as I kind of mentioned on the last slide, it does include single-family attached does have specific site design standards that could apply to it, specific residential standards, landscaping standards, things like that. So I found this image on the American Planning Association's website, and I think it did a pretty good job of outlining the differences between the different housing types and how they relate to our definitions for single-family detached, attached, and multifamily dwelling. Our definition for single-family detached is a detached dwelling exclusively for and occupied by one family. So that's going to be analogous to the image that you see on the far left under single-family dwelling. So that's your typical standalone individual dwelling unit, your typical house. Then you move into the single-family attached, and so that I gave you that definition earlier, but just to remind you, it's building containing between 2 and 4 single-family dwelling units, each with its own outside entrance, where each are joined together by a vertical common party wall. So that's going to be the 2 images in the center, and then on the right, you may see just a typical duplex would qualify as a single-family attached. And that goes all the way up to a townhouse, what could be considered a townhouse project with up to 4 dwelling units that are attached. Where we get into, maybe some issues is when it's horizontally attached dwelling units, but it's more than 4 units. So if it's more than 4 units, then it's considered multifamily, and then all of our multifamily standards would apply. So won't go through the entirety of it, but it's a dwelling containing 5 or more dwelling units where the units are often stacked. So that's going to be analogous to the images that you see at the bottom. So that the image that says 4 units and it's 4 dwelling units that are vertically stacked like that, even though that's 4 dwelling units and could be considered a fourplex, or a triplex would be kind of considered the same. That would be considered multifamily under our code requirements. And then obviously your more traditional garden style apartment would be obviously multifamily as well. So just like I mentioned earlier, we took a very, very quick look and at a very, very high level to just skim through the code to see what code sections you may want to consider taking a look at if you were to move forward with any sort of code amendments. Obviously, the land use table would need to be updated. We would need to add, council at the end of the day would need to make the decision as to whether or not the use would be permitted by right, whether or not it would be considered permitted but a secondary use, or a conditional use. A conditional use would be an item that would be approved by the Planning and Zoning Commission, and any other conditions or specific standards that should apply to that use type in that zoning district. I already mentioned the purpose statement. We would also maybe want to take a look at some of the district dimensional standards. So those again would be the whether or not the zoning district that we're allowing this use is right sized for the type of housing that we're trying to allow in that zoning district. So you would want to take a look at the lot sizes, specifically the setbacks, just to make sure that the use that you're allowing is actually something that's buildable in the zoning district and that there's not going to be any sort of other conflicts. The other two that I mentioned here, at a high level, I didn't really see any conflicts, but we would want to just take a look at our use-specific standards, any sort of design standards that we may have, any sort of landscaping standards. And then, again, if you'd like, you can take a look at the definitions for single-family detached, attached, or multifamily. One other piece I'd just like to mention here is references to the single-family zoning district that we find in the Envision Longmont Comprehensive Plan. I'm not going to bore you with too many details here other than to say it was adopted in 2016 and it established future land uses. These future land use categories were intended to provide decision-making bodies such as yourself with the intent and essentially to kind of guide your decisions to show how these areas of town will develop over the long term. In 2018, when we adopted the current land development code, the zoning map was designed in such a way that it actually matches these future land uses pretty closely. So one of those future land uses is called the single-family neighborhood, and it's not the same thing as residential single-family zoning, but our zoning does match with the future land use. So you can see in the image here, this is just a screenshot that I got from the comprehensive plan, and it shows where all the different future land uses are located. All the yellow are areas that are where the future land use is single-family neighborhood. The comprehensive plan also includes some qualitative statements to identify key characteristics for what those future land uses will look like. And in that piece for single-family neighborhood, it does identify it as primarily single-family detached with a low density of 1 to 8 acres or dwelling units per acre. It does say that these neighborhoods should be well planned with easy access to bike and ped facilities, but it does make reference to single-family detached in the comp plan as well. So just to kind of summarize this slide, I took a look at a few other different cities. Every city does zoning slightly differently. Some are more complex, some are less complex. But I tried to go through everything, some of these cities, and see where we would sit and where our current regulations sit in the context of our peers. So as you can see here, everybody does things a little differently. Boulder and Denver have recently made changes, in some cases very high-profile changes, to the land development codes to allow for more housing types in residential single-family zoning districts. Primarily, so it's a little bit of a not a same-to-same comparison, but at a high level, they are permitted by right. So duplexes and townhouses are permitted by right, both in Boulder and Denver, although there may be some minor additional conditions that a developer, property owner would have to comply with in order to actually construct that housing type on their property in the zoning district. Fort Collins and Loveland, similarly, they kind of have it's more of mixed approval, I called it. So in some of their residential districts, they do allow duplexes and townhouses by right, but then in other residential districts, they still require what would be analogous to conditional use. So they still require Planning and Zoning Commission approval, even though they have different types of residential areas, and some of them they still do require some level of additional oversight by a commission or board. And then finally, Thornton and Westminster still have individual zoning districts where single-family detached and attached are separated. Now, to get to the nitty gritty part of why we are here. The request to amend the land development code is called a code text amendment. It's considered a major development application, and it's a legislative act. It can be initiated by the city council, the the city manager, or the planning and zoning commission. It can also be initiated by individual citizens, in which case the citizens would request that city council, they would petition city council to direct staff to initiate an ordinance, and come back to city council where they would make the final decision. The final decision in either of these scenarios is made by the city council. And the council may request planning and zoning commission review and recommendation. They are not required to ask the planning and zoning commission for review and a recommendation, and there are some circumstances where if the city council initiated a code text amendment, they could just tell staff to prepare an ordinance and come straight back to them, where they would they would take action and vote on whether or not to approve it. But since this type of request would be initiated by the Planning and Zoning Commission, obviously it would, if it did move to the City Council, it would move forward with a recommendation that came from y'all. There are some review criteria, but there's only one, but it's very long. So the one review criteria is located in section 1501.030. I did not copy it all out because it is located in the purpose and intent section of the entire land development code. Essentially what it says, there's 6 very high level goals. It has a bunch of sub goals associated with all of that. Based on the direction that Planning and Zoning Commission goes in, city staff, if we were asked to make a recommendation, we would take a look to see how the request falls in with these criteria. And much like the earlier discussion, we would provide a recommendation for, based off our analysis, does it meet these approval criteria or not? And then finally, depending on the type of change that's proposed, if it's going to create what's called a non-conformity, which means that if there are development applications that are currently under review that would not be able to be permitted under any sort of future changes, there would be a up to 120-day moratorium on development applications. We wouldn't be able to take action on any development applications that could be affected. Council can extend that timeline by another 120 days, and there's some additional technical details in there as well. In this specific case, since the request would be to relax relax restrictions in the zoning district, I don't think that it would result in any nonconformities, but obviously we would take a look at that as well. We would also probably want to provide you with a list. If there were any projects that we had under review, we would want to make sure that you're aware of those projects before moving forward. Okay, so next steps, depending on how you all would like to move forward, you can take action tonight. You can just discuss it tonight, but or you could take action at some future date. And this would apply to any code text amendment that you would want to make. The first step would be the Planning and Zoning Commission would make a motion to direct staff to bring back a recommendation on the text amendment at a regular session. So since this is a work session, you cannot take any official action, but you can provide us with direction, and we can come back on a regular session item and present the recommendation. In that case, it can be as detailed or as limited as you'd like, and we'll take a look at what you all have directed us to do. We will analyze the code, see if there's anything else that we feel like you should know about, and we would bring that back at a regular session item, as a regular session item, at which time you all would vote on it, and the recommendation would then move to City Council. City Council at that stage has quite a few different options. They would direct staff, depending on the scope and breadth of the request. They can direct staff to go back and look at everything again. They can ask more questions of us and have us do more studies and look into things a little bit more and then come back to them. Or they can move forward with it at that time. But regardless, City Council would need to hold a public a public hearing. So that would be an opportunity for members of the public to come in and voice their opinion about the request. And City Council would take final action and vote on whether or not to approve any sort of text amendment. And I have summarized all those words in this super easy flow chart. So to summarize, you guys direct us to go study it. We will bring back a recommendation. Y'all will vote on the recommendation. Then it goes to City Council. And that is the entirety of my presentation. Y'all had no questions as I was walking through it, or I was walking through it too fast. So do y'all have any questions at this time?
Thank you. I am going to go completely out of order and ask Commissioner Earl, because he brought this to our attention, to explain what it was he was intending to do, if he's willing to do so. And you are seat 7, and I'm recognizing him. I will come back to the rest of you in a moment.
And here I was just waiting for the end to make my, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Nathan, thank you. That was a fantastic presentation. I appreciate you and staff working through this. The intent behind bringing this discussion up and why I made the motion in February was this seemed like a way to allow us to address some of what we've been hearing from the public in discussions, that we have the choice of single family or apartments, and there's nothing in the middle. So, you know, this allows us to have a little bit of a missing middle housing solution. It allows for, you know, what I would call probably quiet density in a few places, and, you know, relatively, you know, small projects. I can't imagine this is something that's utilized widely, particularly since a lot of our, you know, most of the area that's residential single family is built out. So this requires, you know, conversions, renovations, but allows a way to do that, helps us address the cost of housing, et cetera. That was the reason for bringing it up. Obviously, there's a lot more complexity than just changing a letter in the table, which is what the motion was for originally. So I appreciate that staff has gone through this. Mr. Chairman, unless, you know, I would be happy to let other commissioners ask questions first, since they were in the queue first, if that is appropriate.
It is very appropriate. Commissioner Saunders.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation. I am wondering about the precedence of this, about P&Z bringing recommendations on code to City Council. I have not seen or heard of this. If you can go back to slide 10 for a second.
Yes. I don't
Because
have
we're
the-
not a legislative body, correct?
Can you tell me which slide you were?
10. Keep going.
Oh, okay, I see.
Yeah.
This one. Yes.
So I don't see anywhere where this is initiated by P&Z.
Yes, it can be.
Where am I seeing that? City Council, oh, or P&Z? So back to my original question. Is there precedence for this that you guys can think of? Yeah, I'm just concerned because we're not, as a commission, right, we're quasi judicial, so we're deciding things. We're not creating code, we're not changing code, we're giving, you know, if City Council directed us to do something, then we would give our feedback, but we wouldn't be the initiators of such code change because we're not voted in by the public, right? We're appointed by the people who are voted in by the public. So I feel like this is a little bit of a slippery slope. And so I haven't, but my view is narrow. So I don't know if there's other precedents for this. I'm just concerned. Like Dawn says, if there's something that you can't put your finger on that's like bothering you about it, this is what's bothering me about it.
So the code does allow the Planning and Zoning Commission to initiate the process for a a text amendment.
Code text amendment, okay.
But it doesn't give you the ability to adopt a code text
Yeah.
amendment. The final decision is still made by the planning or by the City Council.
Sure.
And you know, they can choose to not hear it at all.
Sure.
Or they can choose to approve it. So there is the mechanism by which you can move forward if you wanted to. But you're by no means required to. In my experience, sometimes this comes up just by by you're seeing a lot of things or a lot of issues in the code, and maybe you're wanting to, make initiate a quick and easy fix so that you don't have to see the same issue
Yeah,
over
I
and over
get it.
again.
Yeah.
But and for a bigger policy type things like
Yeah.
this, it again, there are a lot of different ways to for you all to move forward with just directing staff to look into this more. Not sure in terms of how to communicate the request to city council from where we are. And then lastly, I'd just say, in terms of precedent, I have not been here for a super long time, but
I saw John working his way down here.
do you want to answer that part? I don't think that this is well, I'll let the boss speak.
That's always the right play. Let the boss speak.
Members of the commission, I'm not familiar standing here right now with any specific motion that was made by the planning commission asking the council to consider code revisions. None are coming to my mind. I just don't remember anything.
Sure.
But I think Nathan expressed it very well of that. If you kept seeing, for example, like your variances, right, that you're starting to see now as a board of adjustment, if you kept seeing the same variances coming over and over again and you kept approving those, might be something where you might want to act as a group and make a recommendation to direct staff to take up to council to amend that section of the code, because as the board that's been granting variances, this may be a problem for a lot more people and something that isn't enforceable, so why have it? So that's where I could see you looking at an issue and saying, this is something that we should let the council know about, because they would never know, because they're not going to see a variance, for example.
Well, yeah, and that's where I think the process is. I get the practicality of it. That makes a lot of sense. Like, we're seeing it, we understand it, and code is complicated,
Yeah.
and I get that. I worry about the due process of it all, because the process that I understand it is, if you had a problem as a citizen, then you would go to council and you would tell them, and then council would direct. We
Yes.
only work what council directs us to. Like, we're not supposed to initiate anything for staff to do anything because it's taxpayer money. We're not, because we're not voted in, right? We're appointed. So that's where I get the hairs on the back
Yeah.
of my neck going, I'm not sure. I mean, I get the practicality of it. I really do. But like,
It's
I'm
an interesting quandary, because I would say that I think you have a power that's been given to you by the code that doesn't have the same handcuffs as, say, a citizen, right?
Right.
Of that, we would like you to take this up to council and ask them if you could work on it. You could actually, the way this is set up, you could technically make a motion directing us to work on something. Now, our response may be, we're going to have to get back to you on when we can do that based on the workload that we are currently have, based on the priorities given to us by council. So it may not be that we can get back to you for 6 months or 3 months, depending on the extent of the request. But it's also one of those, I don't know, I'm going to get it wrong, probably Marvel things, right? With great power comes great responsibility, right? Of like, you have this ability to give it to us, but I think to your point, it should not be the automatic go-to. It should probably be something you think about and make sure that this is the direction that the commission really wants us to take and use that power, right? Because there is no check on it from that standpoint,
Yeah.
other than us saying, we have 4 other
That's
priority
my
projects of
concern.
council
Yeah.
that we have to get done first before we could get to this. So I know where you're
I
coming
appreciate
from,
it.
and I can
Yeah,
appreciate
I
that. So
appreciate
thank you.
that. All right, thanks for you guys also catching my bad reading. All right, I'm gonna let it go. Thank you.
Thank you. Quick question. Do we have a rough idea how many single-family detached qualified, how many are there roughly in the city? I'm thinking when I see townhouses, they're usually 5 or more. And then with the further stipulation that they cannot be stacked, I'm hard pressed to think of an area where there are only 4 horizontally built houses, because I like the idea. I mean, I like the idea to get the density, and I mean, with the limit of 1 to 6 per acre DUs per acre.
And that was and so that. And
That's Envision Longmont.
yeah, that's Envision Longmont. That's not the density requirement in
What
the
is
land
what
development.
is the density requirement for single family?
I would have
Is
to
it
take
8?
a quick look. Sorry. Let me. What's the density requirement for single family? Yeah. 8.
8. Okay. So with the cap, it's going to be hard pressed to put not that many.
Yeah, and that's
Yeah.
part of the I think consideration is that you don't want to just I mean you can, but it may not be best practice to make a change and then not take a look at any other of the site's development standards
Yeah.
because it may be that it's allowed on paper, but it just doesn't.
In
in reality,
reality,
it's
yeah.
impossible. So, and then to answer your question about properties around town where there are single-family detached, I mean, majority of our majority of our zoning district in the city is residential single-family, and all those are single-family detached structures.
Right, but not attached.
Not attached. For a developer when they're coming in to redevelop either an existing property or greenfield development, so that's brand new development, they do have a couple of different options in terms of how they want to subdivide their properties, and how they want to move forward with different development standards that might apply. So in certain zoning districts, like the multifamily zoning district, townhouses or something that looks like a townhouse that under our code would qualify as multifamily, it still may be allowed, but it would be subject to multifamily development standards as opposed to the less intense single family attached. And really that's going to, when you're looking at that, what you're looking at is, specifically I'm thinking of our landscaping standards. So we would have very different landscaping standards that would apply to multifamily because that's intended to apply to bigger, again, like garden style apartments, as opposed to just a row of townhouses. And so oftentimes we try to flag that as we're going through the review process and try to either come up with different ways of slicing and dicing the development so that it does kind of meet the code standards that the developer is intending to apply to. But yes, there can be 5 attached. It would just be subject to slightly different code standards.
Okay, thank you. And then to get back to Commissioner Saunders, since I've been on, I don't remember us ever making a recommendation. I do know, though, that it has been discussed. Basically, we are considered, correct me if I'm wrong, but as an advisory, which means that we can advise for things like we see this in the code. Since it goes to the same place and the city council ultimately approves it, the hair isn't raising on the back of my neck. And the thing is, it's either basically the public going to the city council or us going to the city council. I mean, it's a little different process, but then again, we also see more than the general public sees. And, we see it on a day-by-day, a month-by-month basis. So in the end, since it has to go to city council, and they're the ones who approve it, and they are elected, I don't have a problem with this process. So, my 2 cents.
Thank you, sir. Commissioner White?
I just need a clarification for the process. When this, or if this does get to council, does it go through the normal council approval where it goes through multiple readings, or is it a one and done kind of thing?
It would go through 2 readings of the ordinance.
Okay, I'm trying to figure out if there's multiple opportunities for the publics to have their input in there.
And there could be, because again, council can and does handle their meetings however they choose to. So they can choose to pause an item to give more time for public feedback. They can really set the scope for how long they want to take up an item. It can last over multiple sessions if they'd like. But as is required by code, it would be 2 readings of the ordinance and a public hearing. So they can also, much like some of the other development applications that have moved forward that are considered legislative acts, again, those would be things like annexations. They can hold a public hearing, and then once the public hearing has been satisfied, that can take place either on one day or multiple days, depending on the number of folks that show up to speak. But once the public hearing is closed, then they still have to move through, they still have to approve the ordinance twice.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have for now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now I'll ask some real questions. I want to, I'm looking at the attachment one that was provided here.
Yeah.
And so there's the setbacks and different requirements. I'm looking specifically at the table that lets us just kind of compare them side by side. And I'm not going to ask you any details about this table, I promise. But when I'm looking at this, my reading is residential single family is already generally requires bigger lots and the same, if not more, setbacks than mixed neighborhoods. And so, first, is that accurate, at least directionally?
Yeah, so as an example, lot area, the minimum lot area for residential single family is 5,000 square feet. Minimum lot size or lot area for a development, so any of the permitted land uses that are in the mixed neighborhood, that's 4,000. So you can see that they are quite similar. Where they do differ is under the setbacks section. So the side yard interior common wall is going to be, so there are no standards for, it doesn't say none, it just, there are no standards for an interior side yard. Under the mixed neighborhood, it says none because, like in the example that I gave earlier, if there's a duplex or a townhouse, and if the developer wants those to be on individual lots, then they'll plat lots for each unit, and the party wall, the dividing wall, will be located on the property line. That would not be possible in the single family zoning district. So you wouldn't have two detached houses that were able to encroach within the side yard setback. So essentially, in my review, that would definitely be one of the code standards that would need to be adjusted in order to allow for any sort of attached use.
So I'm trying to understand that a little bit, because at least where my brain goes, and this may not be an accurate statement, if you were to not adjust it, you'd basically have one lot with the two dwellings on it.
Yes, and that is
or
another
2+. Where
Yes.
in the mixed neighborhood, you actually can have separate lots with, that shared wall.
Yes, and so that's definitely a different scenario.
Okay.
Where a duplex can be located on one lot as long as it's within all the other applicable setbacks. The difference there, obviously, is that those would be all on one lot, so they would likely be rental rental units as opposed to ownership units. So again, that's another kind of policy thing to keep in mind. Do you want to create opportunities for townhouses to be bought at some point in the future, or are you trying to incentivize additional rental development?
Okay. And that's really helpful to understand, because I think also at that point, if you were talking about separating lots in your residential single family, your lot area has to be a minimum of 5,000 square feet each. You're also making fairly big lots.
Yes.
For attached housing. Okay. Thank you. The current definition of single family attached is up to 4 units horizontally connected.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything to say that, I really hate this hypothetical, and I apologize to everyone on the planning staff for even me bringing this up, that you could say, we're going to have a residential single family, a residential attached small, meaning like up to 2, a duplex only.
Yeah.
And have a criteria for that you could allow in RSF, where 3+ still has to be mixed neighborhood.
If again, in the scenario where that would be a direction that you would provide to staff, we would take a look at how that would look. But yes, you could definitely, as part of this text code amendment process, you could make a recommendation to create specific standards that would apply to duplexes or single family attached up to 2 specific units. Without that, if the code is silent on something, the rest of the code does apply to it. So unless it's a specific carve out for duplexes, it would be treated the same as townhouses of up to 4 dwelling units.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you. You covered this, and I just want a little clarification. So, table of uses we have permitted, meaning allowed by right, it can be done, assuming it complies with everything else in the code. And then there's also the permitted secondary. Practical impact if we were to say, single family attached is permitted secondary in RSF instead of just permitted by right.
So what that would mean is anytime we see a development application that is listed as a secondary use, we keep track of all the secondary uses that are permitted within a contiguous zoning district area. So if there's an area of town where all the land is contiguous and it's all zoned one thing, we keep track of all the secondary uses that are currently there. And then we try to make sure that secondary uses do not become the majority of uses in the area. So
Is there an objective criteria for that staff uses?
we do have some criteria. So anytime, the short answer is yes, we do. And we do have a process by which we track these things. So the practical implications would be if we received a preliminary plat, for example, that would be a development application that you all would see and that you all would be the final decision-making body on. Before that comes to you, we would do an analysis to make sure that if it was a secondary, if the majority of the uses that were in that plat were secondary uses, we would just make sure that it fits in and plays nicely with the rest of the secondary uses everywhere else. If we ever got to a point where secondary uses took up a majority of the area, then we would come back to you and say, if you do approve this preliminary plat, just know that the secondary uses are going to make up a majority of the uses in that area, and there may not be any opportunity for the primary uses to develop.
Very related question, slightly different. A permitted secondary use doesn't mean it has to go to the P&Z Commission.
Correct.
Unless there's something else about it that requires it to do so.
Unless it's a conditional use. So,
Okay, yep.
So where it does get a little weedsy, but there are some uses that are just conditional uses,
Yep.
and those are uses that y'all approve, and then there's conditional secondary. So that's kind of the two-part. Like it is also a secondary use, and it requires commission approval.
Okay, thank you. That's enormously helpful. The whole presentation's wonderful. Thank you. I really appreciate going through it. Just briefly, Commissioner Saunders and Poland, you both brought up our authority to do so. This might be just as a new commission member, but when I was applying, I looked at Chapter 2.32 of the Municipal Code, which established why P&Z exists and its purpose, which is to, quote, review and advise council on all public and private activities involving the physical, social, and economic development of the city, which is actually fairly wide-reaching, that we have the ability to do. And our functions and duties, one of them is consider changes in zoning ordinance and make recommendations to the city council, where what we think of, or what I think of as the primary function is review and act on development applications, is C in our list of functions. That's D. So they're, at least in how we were established, they're very similar. And Commissioner Poland, you had asked about neighborhoods that you think where this looks like. The example that's in my brain, and this may or may not be the right one, is between 17th and 19th along Collier. It is a RMN neighborhood. It is predominantly single family and duplexes if you're just walking through that neighborhood. And so it's streets like Emery, Corey, Jewel, where they sit side by side. They're relatively small lots. And to me, that's kind of the thinking behind this is single family and duplexes, where you have a character of a single family neighborhood. You're not disrupting that character, but you do allow for some extra density there. So that's where my brain is. Whether or not that's exactly what the code we're talking about is different. But so, thank you.
I'm going to trump for a minute. I think I'm probably going to cut you off, which is, I found this section, it's 1502060D that specifically allows P&Z to initiate statutory or ordinance proposals. My question for staff, though, is there an ability to predict where this might grow, and what its impacts in terms of two things, density and cost might be? Or do we just release this virus into the environment and hope for the best? I mean, is there any way to predict how this might actually work?
Well, there probably are. I would say that the best course of action is probably to direct staff to look at that specifically as part of your motion, because that would give us the opportunity. Like, I wouldn't be able to answer that question right now, but off the top of my head, we would want to look at what existing parcels are large enough. The comprehensive plan does also identify areas of change and areas of stability. So we would probably look at the areas of change and look to see how many undeveloped parcels are there in that area, how many developed parcels are developed with only single-family detached uses, but are, that the lot characteristics are large enough to where, a duplex could be built on that lot. So there are ways that we can look into it. Again, to Don's point, that may take us a month. It may take us, depending on the type of direction that you send us on, it could take quite a while for us to come back with a response.
That specifically was my question, is whether or not you can do that science. It sounds like you can. Commissioner Saunders.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate my commissioners and planning staff for the robust discussion and for changing my mind by presenting fact-based evidence to me. So thank you. Mostly I've changed my mind. I still think I'm going to think on it a little bit, even though it's written here in black and white in code, that the procedure is fine. I will say that to this specific point that, the word just last, character of the single family district, I think would be one of my biggest concerns in trying to, which I think is a good idea too, about bringing in a higher density, if you will, to get that missing middle, which I think Commissioner Harold has a great idea. So I think that would be my 2 cents if it were the character. Thank you.
I just had a couple quick comments. So, and could you go back to the slide briefly where you talk about Envision Longmont and the, okay, so here, Envision Longmont primarily talks about just the low density. Is there anything specifically about the character of the neighborhood Envision Longmont tries to create, or do you not know that?
Oh, it does. If you, I summarized it here, but again, it highlights key characteristics, and it does say one of the key characteristics is that it's predominantly single-family detached.
Okay.
Again, when we're looking at, under the comprehensive plan, when we're looking at the city in 30 years, when the comprehensive plan will come into fulfillment, the idea was that within those future land use areas, they'll be made predominantly of single-family detached. It also calls for just high-level the dwelling units, and then just some characteristics of how those neighborhoods should be laid out. And again, as we mentioned in the earlier presentation, we look at the Envision Longmont plan to guide both our recommendations at the staff level, and then to help the decision makers to come up with their determinations. So if there was a request that was blatantly out of line with what the future land use called for, then we would highlight that. That's a document that was approved by the city council, and that's intended to guide all of our decisions. So we wouldn't want there to be any sort of conflicts between what the comprehensive plan is saying and then what type of development applications we're approving. There is, for what it's worth, there is a process for updating the comprehensive plan. That may be a discussion for a different time, but that is also a process that we have.
Okay. That makes sense. Thank you. So I guess, as like a general comment, that at least to me it seems like we wouldn't want to try to update the comprehensive plan if we were to do this. Just thinking about like if we were to do this, I don't think we need to touch Envision Longmont. And I don't think it would make sense, at least to me, to try to change density or anything like that. I wonder if there is some way to look at feasibility of like within the existing constraints, within some of those existing constraints, if these types of developments would be like possible, like within the current constraints, but you are allowed to build attached and the lot size setback has changed. Would you actually be able to build the attached and with the 1 to 8 DU per acre? If we do end up making a motion, that might be something to like do a feasibility study. The other comment I had was, since it was mentioned that other cities have made similar changes, I wonder if it might be worth having staff, or if we do end up deciding to pursue this, having staff make a summary of what those changes are to first inform the feasibility and what types of changes other cities made, so that we're not trying to do this blindly. There is some precedent in the area that we could look at. It might be a useful thought. That was the only comments I had. Thank you.
Commissioner White? Thank
No.
Poland. I think I turned you on too.
Yes, you did.
Read wrong.
Woo! Quick question. Is it safe to assume that in some of our older neighborhoods that we already have things like duplexes intermixed with single-family houses?
That is likely correct, yes.
Okay. So the precedent is kind of already here in the city. Plus, in a way, and this is my comment, this is also like almost like accessory dwelling units, kind of taking it a little different look at that. But so I would be for moving forward with this being looked at.
Yeah, now comes the tricky part, which is crafting up a motion. Commissioner Earl, I've been writing down ideas. Do you have a full concept you want to propose? I think I'll recognize you as the next person who wants to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was going to try, but I do not have something written out. If you have, I would defer to you to try to go through, and I can amend it as.
No, all I have are
needed.
the ideas put together, which is, to study viability, likelihood of impacts, and evaluation of what's going on in other cities. Just ideas.
Okay.
How that gets crafted into, and we didn't even have our lawyer here tonight. Took the night off.
I told him not to.
Lawyers.
I thought we can't do motions or vote on anything.
No, we can make a referral to staff, that we,
Okay, so
that
no
was,
voting.
Well, we're not voting to approve any changes. We're
I thought
a
no
motion would
motions
be
either.
just to bring it back to us.
I didn't think we could do motions either.
yes, motion to have staff study further. We could do that.
Without telling you what the motion will be, it would be to direct staff to prepare an item to bring it back to a regular session where you can take action. Can't take action on any recommendations or approval of anything, but you can say, we want to put this on a future agenda item, and we wanted to.
That's all it is.
Right. Similar to if it comes under items from commission.
My hair motions are going. Okay. I trust you guys. Mostly.
I was just going to add, sorry to interject, and I think Nathan mentioned this before, but the other direction could be if you need more information before you want to see any form of draft, that would be an option as well. You want to see feasibility, you mentioned a handful. You could request that, we could bring it back in another session like this so that you could chew on it before you specifically request us to bring back language for consideration.
Mr. Chair, do you want me to vacate the floor for the moment, or?
Do whatever you want to do. If you
Okay, because I would like to make a motion that this comes back, that staff studies this. So the motion would be for staff to study in further detail, adding single-family attached as a permitted land use within residential single-family zoning districts. And staff's evaluation of that should include, but not be limited to, what's being done in other municipalities near us, potential impacts fiscally and infrastructure-wise, feasibility of even doing so on, in neighborhoods and existing lots, and potential impacts on character of neighborhoods as well. And would certainly be open to anyone wanting to add items on that, assuming there's a second for that motion.
So, I'm sorry. Now we have a motion. Do we have a second? I will recognize Commissioner Jordan because you're next up.
I would certainly second it. I didn't, Commissioner Earl, did you cover other, let's just call it, I don't want to say use cases, case studies? Is that what you were looking for? If there was any, like, other cities that are comparable to Longmont that have done similar thing, was that what you were getting at?
That was the intent.
Okay, good. If you, I think you covered that language kind of, but if you didn't, that's what I'm interested in.
Okay, so now we have a second. We're gonna open it up for a little bit more discussion. Commissioner Jordan just added some discussion. Are there other points of discussion you were on?
I was gonna second.
Okay. Anyone else have anything they want to add? Commissioner Lang?
You point out developed versus undeveloped lots. That'd be good to kind of quantify that as well in terms of potential for, I mean, we talking, you know, developed lots and knocking the houses down on those lots and putting up new structures, potentially? Or just undeveloped lots? Or both?
I'm gonna add 2 cents here. In the fact that we have a motion on the table and it's been seconded, the comments amongst ourselves might ultimately be directed as a possibly suggestion of a friendly amendment to the motion. So think about that with your comments. Moving on to Commissioner Earl. Is that-
Yeah, I was taking that as a friendly amendment.
Okay.
And so, yes, I would support amending the motion to, include that discussion in what staff is going to study and bring back. So that, specifically, that's looking at, existing developed parcels versus undeveloped parcels.
So now we have an amended motion on the table. Does anybody want to second that one? I think fair enough. Any more discussion? Janet, I think we'll take a vote on it.
Commissioner Lang?
Aye.
Commissioner Wang?
Aye.
Commissioner Poland?
Yes.
Chair Height?
Aye.
Commissioner Saunders? No. She threw me off there. Commissioner Earl? Commissioner Jordan?
Aye.
Commissioner Arment?
Aye.
Chair, that passes 7 to 1 with Commissioner Saunders dissenting.
Thank you very much. This now enters into a 7-day appeal. Do you want to add more? Do you want to explain? I'll give you the opportunity to. Go ahead.
I'm confused why we need a motion. Is it going to a work study? It's going to a regular session now? That's why we needed a motion? I mean, if it just to get more information, it seems like that's how we got here in the first place. I just said I wanted to have information about the packet. We didn't make a motion to bring information about the packet.
It's true, we didn't, but.
So, and I don't think we're supposed to be doing anything formal in a work study. So I think procedurally, it's throwing me off, and that's why it's a no.
Fair enough.
So, yeah, so based off of our discussions with city attorney, this was essentially adding an agenda item to a regular session. So the motion that you just took is at some point in the future, we will bring back our research, and there will be an agenda item on a regular session where you can take action on a recommendation. It may not be next month or the month after. And in the meantime, you can hold as many work session items on this as you'd like, again, to request more information, and we can talk about it more with the understanding that when this comes back, it would come back on a regular session item where actual action can be taken.
All Sorry. So was that the intent then, to go to a regular session to decide on something, not get information back in a work study?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner Saunders, the motion was actually intentionally vague, that staff was to study and bring it back to us. And so the way I worded it was such that if we felt like we had enough information to make a decision, it could come back in a regular session. If staff felt like they needed to clarify along the way, they could bring it back in study session. But if we ultimately decide it's worth having a formal discussion about, we have to do so in a regular session.
Right.
No question about that.
Right.
Yeah.
That's what you're asking them to do, to bring it to a regular session.
Yes.
But,
Yeah,
that's
you
what you
will-
said, that's why the motion is.
Yes, eventually.
So we're not gonna talk about it until the regular session, where it's brought up, or we're gonna move on.
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily. I
That's
think.
gonna come back to us again in another work session.
Yeah.
Might.
I mean,
That's what the motion was for, to go to a regular session.
it was to add it to a future agenda. Future,
Oh, so
being
it's up to
ambiguous.
you to decide if it's
I mean,
regular or regular. Okay.
Based on the
Yeah, I
discussion
guess
that we.
that's why my no is
Yeah,
a
no.
no.
Well, I mean, so at some point this goes to a regular session meeting to be discussed and voted on.
Maybe,
Well, correct.
okay.
We've given the guidance to do that. If staff along the way comes up with something in that what we've asked them to study that requires further clarification, or goes down a whole different path that we didn't envision at the time we did this, they can bring it back to us in a different forum because it might be beneficial to have that discussion
I don't
in a
think-
study session.
I don't think they can, because it's going to a regular session. It's not gonna go to a work study. Right, what do you guys, it's awfully quiet over there.
We
Well-
directed them to bring us back more information.
To
That-
a
that-
regular session, that's why there was the formal motion.
no, but I would suggest too that we could have just asked.
Yeah,
I'll
that's
like
what
you
I
did,
think, yeah, that's
but
what I
we
think
took
would
it
be
in
more
the form of a-
appropriate. Yeah,
But we took it in the form of a motion, which
Yeah.
was following up on the original motion to suggest to staff to come
It's
back
like
to
how
us.
we did the
with stuff.
land acknowledgement.
I'm just gonna say that no one else can hear us when we're talking, because we're not being recorded. And I've said my piece why my no is no. I think that's okay.
Is there any more? Is there any more that anyone wants to add to this discussion about our motion? To have more discussion?
I was just going to add, I think we have enough that we could have either or went either way. Again, brought back more information for discussion and just general dialogue, or I think we have enough direction, clear direction, that we could bring back a proposed regulatory structure for consideration and ultimate motion. Just my perspective in terms of the input that we received this evening.
Okay. Thank you. I'm going back, I hope, to the agenda of this work session. I thought I had. Which is item 7, which is inclusion of any items from the commission that want to be brought forward. Anything from the commission? Commissioner Lang.
I'll make it quick, but just.
Now
Thank
you're
you, Chair Height. In case it wasn't apparent, I was a little disappointed in City Council's overturning of the Quick Trip decision.
You're not alone.
And along those lines, I like the work Commissioner Earl's done on this one, and maybe further down the road, we even look at code as it relates to proximity of gas stations in Longmont. I kid you not, because City of Denver has a ordinance or a regulation. Their code says I think it's no more than you know, you gotta be at least a quarter mile away from an existing, I don't know, that's way down the line, but something I might wanna look at eventually.
There were legal challenges to that.
I know.
I'll leave it at that. Anything more from council? Oh, I'm sorry. Commissioner Jordan.
This is, I guess, more for Grant as well as the rest of the commission, but I understood that when we started doing neighborhood meetings via Zoom, I think it's variances, I'm not quite sure, but we saw much more participation when we did the Zoom style. Was that correct?
Yes, I believe that's a 100% accurate statement.
I was just curious if it has been considered, and I'm sure there's benefits and drawbacks of like a moderated Zoom style participant option for Longmont citizens to participate in either council or P&Z type meetings. Because I know, again, for the same reason that you can't attend a neighborhood meeting, you might not be able to attend a P&Z meeting, but you might have contributions that you might want to make.
It's a great question / comment, Commissioner. I may let Jane talk some of the logistics. I believe, again, truly logistics is why council has not done that, nor commission. I've been a part of other communities that do that, and I agree that it actually does allow much more participation, greater level of participation. But I think that would be something that would have to be explored from a technical and just logistics standpoint. It's something we could bring up, that there's obviously, support for that. But again, I think the challenges are, again, probably financial, technical, logistics.
Right. I just thought I'd bring it up for consideration. I don't know if it's already been addressed.
Recording Secretary Madrid, do you want to add anything?
I think Grant covered it pretty well. In our case for Planning and Zoning Commission, if you've ever watched a council meeting, there's a lot of staff there to support council in the background. So they have their, PIO there. They have ETS there, someone from IT who's there to help them with technology, which we're typically challenged at when we do that. So I think, again, we've no, not dinging anyone tonight. I think there are definitely some challenges with it that we just don't have as far as Planning and Zoning Commission. We don't have the resources to do that. It would be great on some of the big ticket items that we know come to the commission. But I don't foresee it in the near future on the commission, unless I would let city council move forward with it and get it nailed down before we bring it to our side, because I think it would require more staffing, city staff available to do that, so.
Letting the city council.
Anything more? Director Padlin?
Since Commissioner Lang opened the door, I'll raise that Councilmember McCoy actually requested that the Sustainability Advisory Board explore options for, I'll say, additional regulations concerning location criteria, et cetera, of gasoline fueling stations. The advisory board has met, I believe, twice now for discussion, and they are going to put forth a formal position to council. So that may end up back before this commission at some point.
Interesting.
The only thing I have is, I'll say, any plans that we had in terms of making a schedule, similar to, I think, a couple months ago, has pretty much gone out the window. We have more unknowns than knowns right now, as it relates to specific, land use applications. So I'd love to give you a preview, but I have no preview to give. But I would also add that I think it was pretty clear that the commission would love to have some more dialogue, whether it's in executive session or otherwise, about things like making motions, et cetera. Took some good notes, so I'll coordinate with Jeremy and see if we can get something on the schedule in the format of, again, either a work session or exec session in the future. That's all I have.
cats have been herded, now we let them out. Thank you all. Where's my gavel? Took my gavel. I can't gavel anymore. We're adjourned. Thank you all.